Hi everyone, it's Lizzie Bruff here from Zero to Revenue Challenge, and I am really happy to be introducing Fabs Martins to you all today. So Fabs, thank you so much for joining us. Ahead we have a masterclass, so for the next hour, get your notebooks out and definitely be prepared to take some notes. So Fabs, just as an introduction to our viewers, I want to say that you are an entrepreneur, a consultant, a teacher, and a dad, and I'm really happy that you're joining us today. Thanks, Fabs.
It's a pleasure. This has been a really exciting project. I've been having a lot of fun watching what's going on, and I think that hopefully I'll add a little bit of value to what we've seen so far.
That's brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to you. I know that you've got a presentation that everyone can watch, so I'll let you get set on up.
Brilliant. I will share my screen here. Let me get my presentation up, and we'll be ready to get started. Ooh, I think I shared the wrong bit. Let's do it correctly. Keynote, there we go. Brilliant. All right, shall I get started?
That's great. Over to you.
Brilliant. So the idea that I had when I thought about the project that you guys are doing of putting yourselves under a lot of stress to develop an idea within a very short time frame with a lot of intensity and cameras on you was to actually talk a little bit about how do we make sure that we succeed when we're trying to go in as entrepreneurs, when we're trying to take on such a huge, massive task. And what I've found, at least in my experience, is that we need to kind of shift a little bit of our mindset. There needs to be a paradigm shift that occurs when you are going for this process as a long-term sort of entrepreneur, when it's going to be your life. And a lot of people end up overworking and not really thinking about themselves. And I wanted to kind of understand and frame it so that we can guarantee or almost or pretty much improve the chances of continuous success. And that's what I'm going to present today. Although you've introduced me, I just wanted to get a few words in about myself. I spent 15 years in market research, one of the most glamorous fields of work in the world, where you're just finding out people's opinions and how to manipulate them. And the majority of my career I spent in global or regional roles. Over half of my career I did that. And the last one, I was a global vice president for one of the top 3. And I learned a lot in this corporate world of how to navigate that world and how different it is when you're trying to run your own thing. I am an entrepreneur, like you said. I own a company called KPF Consulting LLC. It's based in New York City. Although I live in London myself, I have some other business partners, and I'm in charge of our online sort of section of the business. And I'm also an advisor to many different companies. Because of my work as an entrepreneur, I ended up connecting with different people I worked with and then asked me to advise them in companies that are in the US, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Portugal, and even Brazil. And I find that kind of work really, really good fun. And I'm also a teacher. One of the things that I kind of learned in my life is that if I don't share the information that I have, that I've learned, I'm missing something that makes me very happy. And so I've been teaching already for over 10 years, 11 years now that I've been teaching the DeRose method, and I'm sure it's going to continue. And one of the things that I said that I'm really proud of, and you mentioned, is that I'm a dad. My son is called Brian, he's 4, and he's just awesome. Fatherhood has taught me a lot, especially in the terms of what it feels to be a teacher. So let's dive into what we're going to talk about today. And I kind of put this word jumbo in there so that we can see some of the issues that we have and some of the elements that I like to tackle today, from being an entrepreneur to finding a motivation, to feeling like you need to be more stubborn, to having focus, to being obsessed with your success, to really putting up with the problems, the stress, the failures, and how we can learn throughout this process. And how are we ultimately going to achieve what we define as success? What is the sort of grander motivation of it? And for me, this process really started when I found myself, and I actually wanted to ask you guys if you found yourself in this situation. Because throughout my life and my career, both in corporate and later as an entrepreneur, I found myself overworking. And I would put a ton of hours and not get the ton of results that I would expect from putting so much in. More than that, I was overstressed. I was putting too much pressure on myself, too many hours, forgetting what really mattered, and unable to really get the results I wanted. And that meant that my motivation started to take a knock. My consistency and the failures that I was getting started to increase. And ultimately, I kind of lost what I wanted to be, where I was, and what success actually meant. And this is part of what I want to talk about today, because I think every entrepreneur is going through this, and especially as you guys are going through such an intense week of processing and fine-tuning and making decisions and trade-offs, it's very easy to lose this direction. And so one of the things that I wanted to add to this discussion is a process to help us to manage it. So how can we do it? And I've kind of defined it. I used time as my friend to define it as something that you can do in the short term, some concepts that help us there, some actions that we can do to help us to achieve the medium term, and then finally, to understand how we can manage our behaviors and the conditionings that we have so that we can maintain and sustain our performance. And although this may seem a little bit funky, I think that understanding these three moments are going to be very important, because ultimately success is going to be about the long term. Nobody starts a project to finish it within a week. Although you guys are doing the performance in 1 week, the company hopefully is going to continue, the project and idea is going to continue for many more years to come. And how do we sustain the growth? How do we sustain the success over time has to be one of the key issues. And to me, this all starts when we're talking about your ability versus your challenge. One of the key things I learned when I was learning the drills method really was this graph. So I wanted to reproduce this graph to you. This graph has 2 bars. It is talking about your ability and your challenge. So let's look at this first one. This first bar here is your ability. This is how much, it doesn't matter what the scale is, but this is what you feel is your ability. When you are faced with a challenge that looks like this, life is easy, right? Let's imagine that I am faced with a little child in the street challenging me, asking me a difficult question. For me, that's a very easy setting. My son is asking me, where do children come from? I feel that my abilities are there. We can tell stories, we can have a lot of fun. The level of tension in this situation is minimal. But then if we compare this to another scenario, where your perceived ability is lower and your perceived challenge is so much greater, we have a problem. Now, you notice that I use the word perceived, and this is actually super important, because oftentimes we perceive our abilities to be good only in a few years' time to look back and say, well, actually, I know so much more today. And the same with the challenge. Wow, that thing that happened in my life just after high school was so difficult to manage. Today, I would take it in a breeze. It would be so easy. And so this is always something that is changing over time, both the ability and challenge. And therefore, if we take any snapshot in the moment, it is always about the perception of your current level of ability and the perception of your current level of challenge. So what happens in scenario 2? This gap here, the size of it, is what we call stress. And that's how, in the DeRose method, we define stress. The difference between the perception of your ability and your challenge. The bigger this gap, the more tension you're going to feel, the more stress you're going to feel, the harder it's going to be to do anything. I don't know if this is super clear. And so what I want to do is to tackle a little bit how this arises. And I think that the best place to start is to talk about the challenge. I recently watched a really amazing movie. If you guys haven't seen it, I really highly recommend it. It's called Free Solo. It's about this guy here, Alex, climbing a huge mountain. And one of the shots of the movie were amazing to me, which was this one here. He is walking towards the mountain he's going to climb. This climb here is 1 kilometer for the Europeans with us, about 3,000 feet for the Americans with us. It's massive. And he's about to attempt to do this, which is a highly advanced, highly technical and difficult climb alone, without any ropes, without any help. This guy's crazy. Look at the size of this challenge. Look at how your perception of the challenge here is. Imagine his level of stress as he faces this challenge before him. And I remember watching this movie and thinking, wow, man, that is a stiff mountain to climb, literally. And so that's why I wanted to use this as a slide. And to me, what was really interesting was that he was walking towards this mountain, smiling, really looking forward to the challenge, because to him, maybe it wasn't such a big challenge. And that's how he did it. That's how the movie kind of is very interesting to talk about the perception of the difficulty of the challenge and the perception of his abilities to do this. So if you haven't watched the movie, I think that this will be a really good illustration of how this process works. And if you have, maybe this is time to kind of review it and see what you think about it. Some people will say that Alex is obsessed about this. He may be even a little bit Asperger's. There's some discussion about that in the movie itself, and I see no problem. Most people that have a lot of success are, because in order to face such a challenge, you have to be a little bit crazy. Developing an idea from nothing to having some revenue by the end of the week, maybe you have to be a little bit crazy. And it's okay. It is only when you are really obsessed, when you are dedicated, and when you're focused on these ideas that it's going to happen. In this particular case, Alex had been training for 30 years. He'd been a really experienced climber. And what to me was sort of, I'm going to spoil the movie if you haven't seen it. It's not a big spoiler, but I should warn you. So if you don't want to hear about it, please put your fingers in your ears. But part of the movie, he is starting the climb by himself with no ropes, no help anymore. He's there and he gives up. And it takes another whole year of training, of testing himself, of fine-tuning his machinery, his mind, to attempt it again. And I think that this is really interesting, that even if his perception of the challenge was good, he was consistently assessing it, because after all, if he failed, it's his life. And I thought it was, I think it's a great example of the perception of challenge and how we can apply that to ourselves. But then the question becomes, well, I am not a 30-year climber. What are you suggesting? How do we manage this challenge then? Well, for me, the management of the challenge needs to be very much about understanding who you are. And the first point to me is, if you are what I call a lone wolf, are you doing things by yourself? And I never recommend it. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you're alone, don't. And to me, it's a sign of maturity when you're saying, you know what, I'd rather have a smaller slice of a bigger pie than try to take it all for myself. And maturity is actually a very important point in managing the perception of your challenges, because the more mature you feel, the better. I mean, we have some great stories of the sort of most successful online companies today, where young entrepreneurs started the company and they felt that they were not as mature as possible. And so they called in highly experienced and more mature CEOs to help them run the business. This is the case with Apple when Steve Jobs hired Scully. It's the case with Google when they hired the CEO, and it's the case with Facebook as well, where he's always had so many people supporting him. And as I was thinking about this topic earlier today, I actually thought of an interesting analogy, because when you're young, you don't really understand what is impossible. It hasn't been hammered onto you that some things may be impossible, and you may just as well go ahead and do it. And oftentimes this is the case. And so the youthfulness, the impetus of youth gives you that sort of nothing is impossible, let's face it, let's do it. And so facing challenges is very important. But maturity brings in the executional experience to allow you to actually take the steps to succeed. And so I think that when you blend these two elements, don't be alone, add some maturity if you don't, and don't pretend that you have this maturity. Look for it. It's a really good step. And kind of in the same line, to lighten the load, you need a mentor. I put in a picture of what the sort of archetype of a mentor should look like, with white hair, white beard, and serious look in the eyes, sort of what everybody thinks of as being a wise person. And hopefully I'm getting there with my white beard. But the idea really is to look for somebody that can mentor you. And having somebody that you can bounce ideas, having a brain trust, it is amazing how much easier a challenge becomes once you start to have that support, once you start to have that. And one of the other things that for me was very important, and it took me a few tries to learn it, especially with the American IRS, is that I need to balance a little bit just getting it done versus learning more about the process and understanding and actually dedicating time to learn. Oftentimes the challenge means that I always feel like I need to be doing, and sometimes it's better to take a couple of steps back, plan more properly the action, make sure that I know what I don't know before I go for it. And ultimately, the concept here is about managing the challenge. It's not about eliminating it or making it any different. But what we want to do is manage the perception of the challenge that we have. And to do that, we can also look at things from a different perspective. I put another picture from the movie here. This is once he's done some climb, he's at the top of the mountain looking down. And as you change the perspective of what you've just done, you can really reinterpret and manage much more efficiently any future challenge that you have. And this means that if we can manage the perception of the challenge before you, we can start to lower that stress gap. We then need to also manage how you perceive your skills and abilities to be. And to do that, we have a huge hurdle. And it's because we suffer from the illusion of the story of the hero. This is problematic because the story of the hero is one of the most prevalent ways of storytelling. We are inundated by it in our pop culture. I mean, when you put a slide like this, if there must be something here that you know, most people will probably know them all. We have this amazing story of this individual who didn't know very much. They were just the average Joe, nothing special. Harry Potter lived under the stairs. And then they have an event that changes their life, and they even get a mentor, which I just mentioned, an old wise guy with a white beard. Look at all these white beards. And one of the elements of this story is that they have this challenge and enemies, and they have ups and downs, but in the end, they succeed. And we kind of want to think of our stories in this way. But the problem with thinking of our stories in this way is that this is a storytelling device. It is not our story. You know, this is how we want to share some learning, because it's good for drama, it's good for storytelling, it's engaging, it's entertaining. But the reality of our stories is very different. It has to do a lot more with training, with sort of days that would look awful in a camera, that would make the story itself sound awful. But the reality of it is still there. And although I may sit here, for example, and summarize so many of the stories that I have of my life into these condensed sort of elements, the in-between is just as important. And if we're going to manage our perceived ability, we need to work a lot on this in-between moments. So let's talk a little bit about how you can manage this perceived ability. And I'm going to use a cliche here, right? Because this cliche is all about how do you manage, knowing yourself. But the problem that I have with this, and I struggle a lot, is to really understand, what does it mean? Know yourself. Sure, I look at the mirror and I see myself. Actually, I look at my son and I see me. It's really weird. He looks amazingly like me. And oftentimes we keep on talking about self-knowledge, self-awareness as being such an important element and something that we must do. And we don't really understand what we're going to do with it. So for example, if you learned that you get moody when you were hungry, what does that mean? Now that you have this knowledge, how does that make you more successful? How does that improve your confidence in your abilities? How does that change? How does that help you to manage anything? And so I find that this cliche of knowing yourself without any context, without any actions behind is somewhat hollow. And this is why I really must say this next sentence, that the knowledge alone is not enough. It is what you do with this knowledge, is what you do with knowing yourself that really matters. If you know you're moody when you're hungry and you know every day you're going to go into the office and interact with individuals, pack a snack. Take a couple of cereal bars and leave them in the pockets of your pants so that, well, if you're a lady, leave it on your handbags or next to your laptop so that you can always make sure that you are not moody. The key here is to build some strategies. And I like the example of being moody when you're hungry, because a lot of the perceptions of our abilities have to do with myths. And one of the sort of most important myths that I know is the myth of the eccentric genius. And I love this picture. To me, it speaks a lot, because there is this myth that if you just try hard enough, if you're intelligent, if you see the world different, it doesn't matter. You will achieve your success if you hit hard enough. And I actually suffered from it. Maybe this is a good time for me to tell a short story of how I started to work. When I left university, I did university in the north of England, and I started to work in New York. And I had this perception that in order for me to be successful, that my abilities really were connected with being New York aggressive. And I found that that was not working. If I was my boss back then, I would have certainly fired me. I was lucky that my boss was a nicer guy than I am, I guess. But, you know, I had to learn a lot about actually who I was, because who you are really does matter. And although we see the myth of the genius in these two pictures, between these two phases of his life, he changed a lot the person he was, how he dealt with other people, let alone look at just a circle of people he managed to aggregate with an Apple to work with him to achieve the objectives. Whilst in the past, he was much more a sort of lone gun, I'm doing it all by myself, my way. In his next phase, literally the next, he had a lot of other very clever people working with. And you only really attract others to work with you because of who you are. And we cannot forget, what is our objective with this, right? So let's talk about knowing yourself again. If you know that you are very demanding, if you have certain characteristics, the whole point of knowing yourself is to build these strategies. Now, I apologize for some of my handwriting on this, but I didn't want to overload the slides. And whenever I kept on reading them, I just felt like I needed to take some notes on my slides myself. And I felt that my handwriting made these points even stronger. Because this cliche of knowing yourself only works when you do something with the knowledge, when you build strategies. And to me, the most important of these strategies is to improve on who you are. So let's dive a little bit deeper on this. Let's understand how we can manage this perceived ability. All right. So who are you really matters. Who you want to be really matters. And this is something very important for us. And the other question that I think is really important is, how long do you want to be around? Maybe it's because I became a father a few years ago, but I ask myself this all the time. How long do I want to be around for my son? How long do I want to be supporting him for? And this is really important because it's going to affect how much I invest in each part of my different abilities and how I perceive myself. There are many ways of sort of calculating ability. One of the ways that I like is to use a graph, because maybe I spent too many years in market research. And what I did with this graph, I spent a lot of time with the DeRose method. I've been now a student of the DeRose method for over 20 years. And so to me, it was very important to kind of get some of these elements in a graph and say, look, my ability is a factor of all these elements. And some of the elements that I wrote down for you guys today are are trying to kind of get a whole range of elements that are going to build up your perceived ability. So let's go through them. Well, the first one is your physical body. You have to be healthy. The other one is going to be your levels of energy. You know, you need to be, even now as I give this talk, we need to have energy. We need to be energetic. We need to be communicating. If you want to be successful and have a good ability for your challenge, you need to have good levels of energy. You need to manage your emotions very efficiently. And I have a lot of thoughts about that we can discuss soon. You need to manage the relationships, both the ones that are external to your work and the ones that are within your work. Both of them are fundamental and really important. You need to have a management of your mind. And if there's questions about how do we manage that, I have a lot of opinions about this as well. In addition to this, there's the personal characteristics. For me, Steve Jobs embodies this and how he had to sort of polish a lot of his personality and yet failed to polish so much of his characteristics to be able to achieve real success in his second phase at Apple. I like to talk a lot about intuition, about information that is not rational, that is coming from somewhere else, but I'm not going to be able to delve into it too much today. There's a really key element to your perceived ability and even to your real ability in terms of the altruism that you have and how much you offer. And I think that to be able to offer really complements the type of human being you are, as well as your ethics, and ultimately to understand your place in the universe. And to me, this graph is really interesting because we can actually start to place your individual performance in here and get a map of where your ability is currently. And I just put some random dots on the map. These dots don't mean anything. I just wanted to get an illustration to you. But you can have, say, a dot there. Your physical body is 60%. What does that mean? Well, it's a sum of a lot of factors, your health, your strength, your flexibility. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but let's imagine that we can put it into a number, which we can. I often do that when I'm consulting with individuals. We need to try to do that for each one of these elements. So your energy levels, your emotions, and so on and so forth. We can actually create a really funky map to understand where you are. And therefore, we can actually be super efficient. We can look at your current position and how can we improve on it so that we can improve your perceived ability as well as your real abilities. So in this case here, this person hasn't got a great emotional management. They haven't got great professional relationships, although they are really certain that their mind is really clear. And they don't really understand their place in the universe. They're just going from fire to fire, trying to put it out and solve issues. They could also improve on their intuition. And so these are things that you can focus on now to improve. And that's one of the important points. To improve also means doing it by baby steps. We're not trying to do everything at once. More than that. And this is something that I think is going to cause a little bit of controversy, and I apologize if I do. But I like a little bit of controversy, so let's see what happens. In my experience running the business at KPF in New York City, I learned, talking to a lot of very interesting people, everybody knows what's good for them, but so few people actually do it. And so I apologize if I am repeating myself in a moment, if you guys feel like you know it, but I think it's very important for us to go through this because ultimately it's going to determine how long you're going to be around. So let's talk a little bit about this and the actions that you can take that are going to improve your performance and your real ability in the sort of the medium term. And one of the key issues that we have with the medium term and with taking care of all these elements that are going to produce a very capable individual is that I've got no time for that. It's almost as if the emails take precedence over your well-being. And I assure you, if you stop 5 minutes, 10 minutes in your day to breathe, that is going to be a better outcome in your final productivity of that day. Maybe you should try it. We'll get a chance to try it in a minute. Let's keep going. So what's good for you? And I'm going to produce here a list of things that maybe is going to cause a little controversy. And one important element about this is that we need to understand that the more we learn about ourselves, the less we realize how much we really know. And I don't know who first quoted this. Some people say it's a Greek philosopher. Who knows? But the fact is, the more we learn about what is really good for us, the less we realize how much we do it and how much we really know what is good for us. So if we take that radar graphic as an example, right, which is what I often use in my consulting, what is good for you? Well, for your physical body, clearly is to be healthy, flexible, and strong. Everybody wants that. Who doesn't want that? You all want to be very healthy, very flexible, very strong. There is how can we measure that? Well, there's a very interesting test that was developed by an academic scientist in Brazil, which he called the stand-up test. So you can do it right now. Why don't you take a moment? I want you, without using your hands, to stand up, sit on the floor, and get up. And see if you can, without the help of your hands, do that. Sit down, and then stand up. And what he found is that when he did this test on people, especially people who were 40 and above, this was the strongest correlation to future cardiac issues, to future problems, to future issues in your body, to future illnesses. A very, very simple test that he could do anywhere in a developing world allowed him to really understand, hey, you need to work more on your physique, on your body, and keeping this machine that is housing your mind healthy. After all, one of the key objectives for us is to be around for a little bit longer. Right. So if we talk about having a healthy body, the next thing to make sure it's healthy is to have a healthy nutrition. And here some people are going to argue with me. I like it to be organic. I recommend it strongly that it is vegetarian and that you have no vices. Yes, vegetarian. In fact, I would say you may even go vegan. And when I say no vices, oh, and actually no fish, vegetarian. Go vegan if you like. It's a little bit more extreme than you have to. Vegetarian is good enough, but do eliminate the meats, even the fish. And when I say no vices, yeah, no alcohol, no smoking, no drugs. Is anybody here going to tell me that smoking is really good for you? We all know what is good for us, yet we don't do it. And if we really want to have an improved ability, if we want to decrease stress, if we want to perform consistently, we need to. And so my recommendation stays, don't drink. How does that improve your life? If you are having to have a drink so that you can have managed the week you just lived, maybe you should be thinking about having a better week. All right. Maybe some of you guys are going to send me some angry messages in Slack. I apologize. This is a recommendation, right? This is what I've done for over 20 years, and I can tell you that the results are amazing. This one is going to be quite hard. Have an effective sleep. Now, you'll notice that I'm not saying sleep 8 hours a day. Different people sleep different hours. Each person is themselves. They all have their biology, their metabolism. But the important point is that sleep needs to be effective, uninterrupted. Try to rest. I have a really good friend of mine, Andy. He sleeps for 3 hours a day. He does 2 hours at night, and then through the day, he does little sets of 10 minutes that keep him going. And he's found that in order to do everything he wanted to do in his entrepreneurial career, that's what he needed. And it works for him. But the 2 hours that he has are super effective. He's able to get into deep sleep quickly and to really re-energize and recharge. If you're not sleeping well, send me a message. I can have some recommendations for you. But this is one of the key factors of something that is good for you. Make sure you sleep well. And yes, have good relationships, both intimate, personal, professional. A lot of my career, I worked in the UK and I worked in the US. And whenever we had an opportunity to take a break, we never did. I would say that for the majority of the people who worked in the office with me, they all ate at their workstation. Don't. Eat with your friends at work. Take half an hour. Talk to them, find out about their day, develop these relationships, because in a few moments, they're going to be super important. And Lizzie, if you guys could also are paying attention to this, if you're going through such a tough project, make sure that you fit in half an hour to eat and eat together, put the work aside, talk about something different, talk about biology, about rugby, about whatever. Reset those relationships, improve them, because they're going to be fundamental when the hard work kicks in. And offer your mind different stimulus, laugh, learn. Even a little bit of silence is important. Your mind is always being stimulated by different things. And by focusing, working hard, it gets very tired. So by giving it different mental stimulus, you can actually reset it, recharge it quite a lot. And finally, also add in a little bit of contemplative time. I struggle to call this meditation because in the marketplace that I see, the word meditation has been really misused, and I don't know what people mean with it anymore. So what I'm adding there is contemplative time, and I can explain that to you guys if you want a little bit later. But the fact is, we need to take a moment to be able to stop your mind, to just contemplate your existence. Even if it is just 1 minute, it's not a lot. These are really good things for you. This is by no means a really comprehensive list, but if we go through this list, how much of this are you doing for yourself? Are you improving on your chances to have your best ability, to diminish your stress, to have a more efficient and effective career, to be a better entrepreneur, to make sure that the freedom that you gain by being your boss is coming across to your life too? I think this is a very important slide. The next slide I'm going to tell you guys is what I did. And I don't know if this is the right thing to do. You'll notice I say this a lot, and later on we're going to explore a little bit about this I don't know. But to me, this is what I did and how I had success. And what I did, really, I was lucky because I founded the Rose method very early in my life. It was 2000s. I was fresh out of university. I was overworking, getting overstressed. And I found this method that was all-encompassing and did all of these elements at once. Most people are not that lucky. I used it for 8 years. I was a student of it from 2000 to 2008, and a really bad one at that. From the sort of 6-month mark, I understood that this was a really important thing to do in my life. So I did all the elements that they recommend. And I thought it was so cool that I started to study to be a teacher. But my studies always lost to my work. And so something that I could have done in 2 years or less, it took me 8. But in 2008, I decided, no, this is the time to go be a teacher. I've got a huge role that I'm stepping into. I'm going to take care of 86 countries and take care of a huge balance of P&L. It's time to be a teacher. I need this extra step so that I can manage the level of challenge. And I've spoken about this method. I think it's actually interesting to put a little picture of who the Rose is. That's the Rose with his dog. And again, the white beard, maybe I like him too much. He's a really nice guy. He's 74 now, and he's still alive. Anyway, the method that he came up with that takes his name is both theoretical and practical. Some people call it a lifestyle. I find it awesome. And it has 2 very broad areas, techniques and concepts. And before I dive into that, I actually want to say a little bit about how much do you need to invest, or how much I invested. The minimum for it is 2 hours per week doing some of these techniques. Maybe add another 8 minutes in your day. Who cannot spare here 2 hours in your week to take care of yourself, to take care of those myriad of factors that are going to help you to improve and be much more efficient consistently? And so I'd like to challenge you a little bit on that. We all know what is good for us, but are we doing it? And in my case, I decided that I was going to dedicate at least an hour and a half every day. And I've done so for the last almost 20 years. And I find it's really good. Well, and next, and I have to apologize here. This is when I'm telling stories to my son, he always asks me, and next, and next. And I just find this phrasal construction really fun. So this is just me being a little bit silly here, but it makes me think of him and I like it. Well, next, once you start to put in that little time, the key to it is to be consistent, to be disciplined. And some people kind of mix these two things together, and I don't want to. I think that's really important for us to understand that the consistency is really important. Doing it at a very steady rate, every week, 2 hours, and stay disciplined on this consistency. And actually, this is a really important point because discipline is a very funky word in our current culture. The way we see is that there's two sides of discipline. And I take a lot of tangents. I apologize if I'm kind of going too far off and too deep into this hole, but this is an important point because there's two types of discipline. There's the one that is from the outside in, and there's the one that comes from the inside out. That may not sound very clear to you guys. So I did a quick note here and I said, look, this outside in, the image that I have is the military sergeant. It is that guy in full metal jacket that is telling his soldiers off, that is telling them to drop and do 50, that is pushing, that is forcing them, that is putting the pressure from the outside inwards so that you can have discipline, so that you can do whatever it is that you set out to do. And there's a different type of discipline, the ones that comes from the inside out, the desire of somebody who loves to play piano to practice for hours, the desire of somebody who wants to climb El Capitan and spends 30 years trying it until he can do a free solo of it, the sheer obstinance that comes from the inside. And clearly these two are really different. When you are forced to have discipline versus when it's coming from within you are really different feelings. And I urge you to look for the kind of discipline that comes from within when you are driving yourself, because then you no longer need to be motivated. You need nothing. It's something you want. We can talk more about it in the questions if you guys want, but I need to keep going because I'm aware that my time is probably going to run out way before I wanted it to. But just to close this up, from some people, when they are looking from this in and out discipline, they may see you obsessed, crazy, stubborn. It's okay. Sometimes we need to be that in order to get success. So how can you develop this type of discipline? Well, for me, it was via the Rose method. It has, like I said, techniques and it has concepts, and I think that my time is really about to be severely blown. Well, the techniques are things you do. They are the starting point. They are going to be improving your strength, your flexibility, your levels of energy, the power, the motivation and confidence you feel, even acting on that self-knowledge, self-awareness that you have. And we're going to actually try it. If I can have some moment, I don't know, maybe we'll cut the slide out. I don't know. Well, we'll figure something out with timing, but I really think it's important for you guys to experience one of these. And there are concepts. And the concepts are much harder to understand because there are things that are going to guide us along. But the concept of the perceived ability and perceived challenge are very much part of the Rose method. And the idea of these concepts is that they're going to come together to be a foundation to make life less complicated. But maybe this is all talk, right? I don't like talk. Let's try to do it. Earlier today, I was telling somebody that I had this crazy idea about an app and I ended up learning how to code Swift and I'm almost done. It's my app. It's in beta. There's over 2 hours of free training in it. No training is more than 5 minutes long and I interrupt you twice a day to train. And the focus of this app and what I understood was so important that's missing is to teach people how to do one of these techniques and then what to use it for. And the specific technique is breathing. If you want, there's a little website there that you can sign up for the beta and you can try it for yourself. It is going to be a free app and I can explain the whole marketing strategy and a lot of the decisions that I had to take along this way. But what I really wanted to do is to give you a flavor of it. And one of the most overlooked elements of what we do is breathe. And so what I like it to do now is just take 5 minutes and I'll time myself to make sure that I'm not going to totally blow my time. Just 5 minutes. And to do that, all you need to do is to sit down. Now, one of the key things that I don't want you to do is to lean back on your chair. Sit up. Make sure your back stays straight, stay comfortable, relax your arms. If you want, you can keep your eyes open or closed. It makes no difference to me. Throughout these next 5 minutes, I want you to make sure that you are breathing exclusively with your nostrils. Good. Start simply like that, gaining consciousness of this process. Breathing is a totally subconscious process. It happens without any of your interference all day long. If it doesn't, you die. Pay attention to it. We are one of the few animals that are able to manage this process, to speed it up, slow it down. Start to gain awareness. Start to notice how much air you have in each breath. Your brain is the organ in your body that consumes the most amount of oxygen that you breathe. Therefore, the more oxygen you have within you, the more you can feed, the better your brain can work. And yet, we never think about how we breathe. And so take a moment, observe, feel how much air you can actually inhale. If we think about the shape of our lungs, they're like two triangles, and the base of them is right near the end of your rib cage. In order to maximize the amount of air there, we need to use the abdominal muscles. And this is actually where the app starts, talking about how to do this, what we call abdominal breathing. You hold around 60% of the capacity of your lungs in your abdomen. Here's the trick. If we're going to use your lungs, you need to make sure that you give room for the lungs to expand. And so the next time you inhale, try to push your abdomen out. This will build room for your diaphragm to lower, for your lungs to expand. When you exhale, pull the abdominal muscles inwards. This will help to compress the lungs and to get rid of the air that you've already used, so that the next time you breathe, we can have ever more oxygen-rich air. Relax your shoulders. Keep your neck straight. Use your nostrils. Inhale fully. Try to feel these abdominal muscles expanding outwards. Keep this rule. Air in, abdomen out. Air out, abdomen in. As you turn this subconscious process into something that is under your awareness, we are breaking a barrier. We are touching your subconscious. We are turning this process that was happening without any awareness. We are shedding light into your subconscious. Slow this process further. Try to see how slowly you can inhale, projecting your abdominal muscles outwards. And then exhale slowly again, contracting them very slowly. This subconscious process of breathing is connected to a whole host of other systems in your body, especially your emotions. When you're anxious, stressed, overworked, your breathing is always shallow, without a lot of oxygen, rapid. When we take charge of this process, slowing it down, making it conscious, adding more oxygen into the system, we can manage these emotional states. Focus on the movement of your abdomen. If you want, put one of your hands over your abdomen. Feel the movement. Learn how to breathe so that you can use this at any moment in your life. Take a moment's break to inhale fully, to exhale fully. Observe how you feel. Observe how this process works. Believe it or not, we've already done 4 minutes. We have less than a minute to go. One more time. Deep breath. Relax the shoulders. Keep your eyes, close your eyes for a moment so you can really focus on this process. Try to feel the touch of the air in your nostrils. Slow it. Hold the air in your lungs for a few seconds. And then as you begin to exhale, feel these abdominal muscles contracting. Feel the flow of the air. Try to slow it further. If you followed my instructions, you can open your eyes and conclude our 5 minutes, observing especially how you feel. This is the concept of this app. We have over 2 hours of training there. If I'm not mistaken, 26 different training occasions, enough work for 2 weeks to get you trained on how to breathe efficiently and how to use this on your day-to-day, what you're going to use it for the management of your emotions, for example. I talk a lot throughout the app in explaining. If you're interested, go down there. Anyway, that was the easy part, the techniques. And you can notice what kind of effect these techniques can have on you. Now, let's talk a little bit about this concept. And the concept is really hard to explain. So I'm going to try to be succinct, although I may fail. Professor DeRose, whose picture you've just seen, talks about 2 different things. The first one that he says is, don't believe. And it took me ages to really understand what he meant. I'm even going to take my glasses off because this is a serious one. Although it's just 2 short words, don't believe. It is a really important foundation to everything that I do in my life, to how I interact with people, to how I work. Oftentimes, when we are interacting with people, we end up having an opinion, a belief. My idea works, and maybe this is going to be really good for you guys in this project as well. When we express this idea, this opinion, we tend to follow the culture that we live in, which ultimately is a Christian culture, and enter the process where, because I believe something, it must be true. And if you don't believe what I believe, you are wrong. And so as this colors our communication, we start to say our marketing strategy has to be that. Anything else is wrong. And if we don't do sales in this specific way, you are wrong. Not because we have the knowledge, the information, or the experience, or have even made the mistakes, but because we believe in that idea. And there's nothing wrong with having that belief. But you need to be conscious that you have that belief. And when you can express it as your opinion, as your belief, it really changes. Well, let's talk about a crazy example, right? I'm discussing with one of the groups of students that I have about building a company. And this company, we need to go farm some stuff. We're literally going to put seeds in the ground and farm some stuff out of it. And how do you do it? And the first answer that I had with them when they came to me to discuss this, I said, I don't know. I have many opinions, but I don't know. And here's one of them. I think that this could work. What do you guys think? Observe the difference in communication and the reception of this information when I say, I don't know. In my opinion, this is the better strategy. Versus someone saying, this is our strategy, do it. How does it influence the work of us as a group? How does it influence the interactivity of the different people involved in the project? This is one of the fundamental pillars of the concepts. Now, I don't want to spend too much time because I know I'm already probably going to blow the time of an hour by a lot. So if you have more questions, follow up on Slack, okay? Now, the next thing that he says is to have an affirmative attitude. And I always struggled a little bit with this, because I hate saying yes to everything. I don't agree with everything. But at the same time, after I understood this concept, it became super important in my life. And what he says is, no matter what somebody comes to tell you, say yes. Somebody comes to you with the craziest of ideas, say yes. And that made me scratch my head and go crazy. It's like, how? I cannot endorse crazy ideas. And then once I understood what he meant, it completely changed my perception. Somebody comes to me and says, hey, Fabs, I've got this crazy idea where we're going to build a company in a week. We're going to go from 0 to having revenue by the end of the week. What do you think? Wow, that's amazing. How are you guys going to work? It doesn't mean that I agree and I think it's possible, but I offer some affirmation. I offer some positive energy to that person. And the person in turn is going to be able to talk, and we're going to end up having a presentation together. Who knew? But it's really important to be able to listen to things, and instead of saying that's a dumb idea, to say, actually, maybe that's right, because I don't know. I have my opinions, I have my beliefs, but I don't know. And so let me listen to your idea. And it's okay to say, how are you guys going to manage this problem? It doesn't mean that I think it's going to fail, but if I see problems and I phrase them in this way, the interaction with people becomes so much more efficient. So if you base some of your behavior and attitudes onto these two concepts, don't believe and have an affirmative attitude, life becomes a lot less complicated. Relationships become a lot less complicated. Working together becomes a lot less complicated. Being a dad becomes a lot less complicated. And I really recommend it. All right. Let's go quickly think about what we've done so far. In the short term, we learned about reviewing, reevaluating the perceptions that we have about our abilities and the challenge. And I think that that's become quite clear. I see nodding heads, good. Next, we talked about the things that are good for you. I do the DeRose method, and honestly, I recommend that to you. I've been doing it for so long, I'm a teacher, I'm biased, but I love it. And in the long term, well, we can actually predict our future. I don't know. Let me ask Lizzie a quick question here, make sure that I'm not blowing my time up too badly. I have a slide that's going to take me 10 minutes. Am I good to go? Yeah? Oh, cool. Very good then. Let's go and do this experiment. Let's predict your future. All right, this is one of the things that kind of blew my mind when I started practicing the DeRose method. I was in a class with Mr. DeRose, and he put this graph up, and I want you to do this graph for yourself. In this graph, we have two axes, right? On the left side is age, and on the bottom side, on the X, is quality of life. What does that mean? It's just an index, right? There's obviously a huge, enormous variety of things that are going to make up this number, but I just want you to think of it as an abstract concept at the moment. So if you think, and if you put it in your notebook, these two axes, I want you to draw 3 lines on this graph. Okay, they're not going to look like the lines on my graph because mine are explaining stuff, but I want you to think about the lines in your graph. As you move from year to year in your life, I want you to start thinking about the life that your ancestors have had. And by that, I mean the people that share your genetic code, but have more age than you. Your parents, your grandparents, your uncles, your older siblings. Understanding your genetic future is super important. If your family has a tendency to be very tall and you are quite young, the likelihood is that you're going to be quite tall. If your family has a tendency to have heart attacks, to have health problems, cancer, that's something that's important to understand. Where does your genetics take you? Just as a quick aside, my dad and his dad both died of a heart attack before they were 60. And my conclusion from that is that my genetics are dangerous. If I don't watch my behaviors, my attitudes, the way I live, my habits, I can fall into that same trap. How am I going to ensure that I'm not on it? Well, I kind of given away that a few slides ago when I said that I have no vices. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't take drugs, I don't eat meat. There's a lot of things in my habits that are trying to prevent these outcomes. But think about it for yourself. Draw that line for yourself. Plot in the different years what the quality of life is for your ancestors. Your genetics are key. And just as important are the habits and the lifestyles that you live. So I want you to plot the people that have the same job as you, your colleagues, maybe your boss, the people that have spent life living the same lifestyle, but there are further along it. I remember I became the global vice president for a company called Ipsos at age 30. For me, it was, I was completely out of my element. Everyone else that surrounded me at that level of career was much older than me. They were in their late 40s, 50s. I was out of my element. And when I looked around, I was scared because I didn't want to be them. I wanted to be me, sure. And I was already being me by being there. But I understood that if I continued there, I would end up with a different circumference, with different lines on my face, with different health problems. And so it's really important for you guys to look at these people that surround you and see what is their quality of life and plot that along the years. And then start to plot yours. Look at where these trend lines are taking you. It may end up looking something like this, right? These are what the lines could look like. But more importantly is, once you start to understand where your genetics are going to take you, where your lifestyle is going to take you, what are you doing about it? Like I said before, everyone knows what is good for them, but so few people do it. What would happen if you did do it? Could you reach 120 years old with an amazing lifestyle? Or maybe not so much. Like I said, both my father and his dad died before they were 60. This is just some foods for thought. I don't want to spend too much time here because I know that I'm pushed for time, but the power of trends is really important. Think about the health, the shape, the success, the relationships in all these lines, and observe how that changes for you. Predict your future. Don't let it blindly guide you. Take charge of it. If you want to be successful in your business, in your life, this is fundamental. All right. Thank you for your time, guys. Let's finish up with the long term, right? So in the short term, what did we learn? We learned that we can gain different perspectives. We can reset in perceptions of challenge, our perception of our abilities. In the medium term, we set in motion, hopefully a few processes. I've given you a couple of examples of a host of other things that you could do to improve yourself, to create the processes that are going to set in motion your improvement, your consistent performance. And finally, what do we do in the long term? Well, it's actually super simple. All you need to do is to train the stuff that we talked, to get better and better and better at it, so that you can raise your game, so that your perceived ability always becomes taller and taller and taller, and you can face ever crazier challenges. All right. Well, guys, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure being here with you. I'm going to be on Slack answering any questions that you guys may have. And hopefully you found this not too long and entertaining.
Fabs, thank you so, so much for that. What a great way to spend the last wee while. I definitely appreciate especially your effort to make sure we're looking after ourselves this week. And I think to your point of sustainability, well, that's it. What are we doing all this for? What does life look like? And what do we want it to look like going forward? So lots to catch up with you on there, and definitely extend that invitation to Slack to anyone who wants to get stuck into some conversations. But thank you so much for your time today.
Awesome.
Okay, take
care.
It's
a pleasure. Even the sun came out for me just now. All right, guys.
Great.
Okay, just soon. Bye.